This is one that we don't often think of that much as Christians, but the occult. People sometimes are involved in the occult, and to use a phrase, Satan worship, and sometimes people wouldn't even call it Satan worship, but the prince of the power of the air is in a lot of things in the world. And here's what Leviticus 19:31, just look at this one verse in the Old Testament. Leviticus 19:31, and God says a lot more in the Old and the New Testament about witchcraft and witches and the occult and things like this. But look at Leviticus 19:31. It says, "Regard not them that have familiar spirits, neither seek after wizards to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God." And the world will do what they do. But as Christians, we need to identify and be aware that we are always steering clear of anything that has to do with demonic activity and witchcraft and the occult. Christians should never involve themselves with things like psychics and astrologers and horoscopes and Ouija boards and things like this. When Israel went into the land of Canaan, he says they're all idol worshippers. By the way, all false religion is demon worship. Every religion other than the true God, than Christianity, it's all demon worship. It's not just, the ideas of man. Who do you think spurs on these ideas? It's the devil that wants anything but God to be God. Here's what God said to Israel when they go into the promised land. He says, "Don't even let the names of their gods be mentioned out of your mouth. Have nothing to do with them." Now, they didn't follow this, and they started, some of them, worshiping the false gods and sacrificing their children to these false gods and doing all these horrible practices. And God says, I want you to be totally separate. Don't even mention it. Don't even dignify the names of them by mentioning them. And we also need to be careful about digging into and glorifying things that, say, well, I don't practice the occult, but I like to watch entertainment that practices the occult. And we just need to be careful about what God says about the occult. And again, for sake of time, we're not going to look at a whole lot of verses, but what we looked at is, God talks about witches and wizards. It says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." People that are doing spells and things that were pulling God's people away from the true God. In the Old Testament, God says those people are to be put to death. Now, I'm not saying that we go put them to death. I'm not saying what was it, Universal Studios or what? Who has the Harry Potter world in it, one of those amusement parks. But anyway, I'm not saying that we go and burn that down. I'm not saying that we find someone and, find the psychic office and go and stab anyone. We're not saying any of that. We share the gospel, we show love, but we avoid that. We do not dignify it. We do not say, oh, it's a fun activity. It's something, it's we do this, they do that. There's one true God, and God is to be God. And in the Old Testament, it was so serious that God says you don't even allow them to live, because and if someone comes to you and says, hey, let's go worship this other false god, it says even if it's your brother, you put him to death, because he's seeking to lead you away from God and the blessing of God. And if we don't have God's blessing, we don't have anything. So we need to be very careful in the Christian life about the occult and the